Hey everyone, I'm Mike Settele, founder of Settele Tutoring, and in this lesson I'm going to talk about a very common SAT weakness that's a little hard to define. Basically, a lot of people tell me that they don't know where to start. They read some of these SAT questions and they basically end up just like staring at the question for several seconds, maybe a full minute before they even do any work. And that's a waste of time, right? This is a time test. You got to move fast. And any time you spend not doing anything at all is time wasted. So what can we do to minimize that time we need to spend staring at a question? How can we figure out what to do faster? So basically, this all comes down to just one simple solution. You need to have a step one strategy, something that you do for every single question to start it off. And if you've watched any other videos on my channel, this is all I talk about. Basically, for each subject, there is a very clear step one strategy that I use all the time. For reading, it's dumb summaries. Basically, look at the passage. If you can just come down to whether the passage is positive or negative, some sort of other weird connotation, that's enough usually to start things off. Sometimes the dumb summary needs to be a little smarter, maybe just a word or two that you can pull out of the passage. But for every single complicated reading passage, that is what I'm doing. I'm just trying to get the bare bones. And I think that even on the hardest passages, you can pull out one really important idea. So that is how I start. I don't worry about the passages where I am a little bit more confused. It's one of those hard science passages. It's a poem. None of that bothers me because I know I can pull something out of every passage. And then if I can need more, the answer choices are going to give me that. So this is something I'm doing with every passage question, every vocabulary question, every transition question. The grammar is a little bit different, but on the grammar, I don't think most people are staring at the question. Usually you're reading it and starting to solve instantly. So it's really those passages where I think a lot of people do way too much staring. Or maybe better yet, they do a lot of rereading. They just read the passage again and again and again and try to say, okay, what could this possibly be about? What are all the details really going to mean? None of that matters. Just start with thinking about simple things like the connotations, whether the passage is positive or negative. That might be all you need, even on some of the hardest questions, to get it right. Where I also think this is really useful is in math. And everything comes down to my favorite strategy, plug points into equations. For every math question, without exception, I ask myself the same thing in my head before I really start it. Did they give me points? Did they give me equations? If the answer to both of those questions is yes, I plug points into the equations. Nice and easy. If the answer to either one of them is no, I have some other opportunities to maybe get back to this strategy. If they gave me an equation, but they didn't give me points, maybe I have to pull the points out of a story or use a y-intercept, an x-intercept, or maybe read some function notation to get a point, or maybe arithmetize and make up the point completely myself. Just put in random numbers. These are all ways of getting back to points when I know I have equations and I really want to plug something in. Other times they give me points, they give me values, data, but they don't give me equations to plug those things into. In a lot of those cases, the equation comes from my memory, something like y equals mx plus b, or the vertex form of a quadratic. Pull the equation out of your memory, pull it out of the reference chart for the geometry, and put it on the page. And that's the other key here, is people don't use the scratch paper enough. They don't use it in reading at all, which is a mistake. You should be using the scratch paper for any sort of passage that you find confusing. Just write down a few words that, are your dumb summary and use that to kind of keep going back to instead of holding those ideas in your head. But especially for math, this is really important. Like, use it to try things. If you have an idea, start doing it. See what happens. You really don't want to be staring at a question, wondering if your idea is going to work. That's a waste of time. Try the idea. It might fail, but at least you'll have learned whether it works or not for another future question, or it might work and surprise you, or even in the failure, you might learn something important about the question. You might notice something that you didn't notice before. So this especially applies to strategies like plug points into equations, like arithmetize. Don't worry if the strategy will work. Decide to do it and then do it and let it show you whether it succeeds or fails. It's better to see it than to wonder about it. And that kind of is the big overall idea for a lot of hard SAT questions too. You don't need to know what step 2 is going to look like to do step 1. And I think that that's really the problem when people say they don't know what to do. They're staring at a question, they can't figure it out. it's not that they don't know how to start. They do, but they're afraid because they're afraid that their idea isn't going to work, isn't going to get them to the end. But you cannot do that. You have to do something. And honestly, I've been teaching the SAT for 15 years, coming up to 20. It's been a long time. And even still, there are definitely questions where I am just stumbling my way through. I'm just literally doing whatever comes to mind. I have no idea how it's going to help. I have no idea how it's going to move the question forward. But because I trust in things like plug points into equations, I do it anyway. I'm given points, I'm given equations, I'm just going to plug them in and see what happens. And more often than not, it works. And so you have to be willing to try that step one and see what it gets you, because a lot of times it moves the question along in ways that you would never have foreseen or never would have expected. So you've got to be willing to do that. If you are paralyzed because you need to have a whole plan before you start step one, you are going to get a lot of questions wrong, or you're just going to run out of time because you're going to spend a lot of time just waiting for the plan to appear. You got to have the ability to take a chance and go in on step one and figure it out as you go. That is a totally valid way to get a lot of these questions right. So one other thing before we kind of close here, if you cannot remember the very simple ideas like dumb summaries and plug points into equations, remember that they give you the scratch paper at the start of the test. So as soon as they say, okay, begin your test, you can just write dumb summaries, plug points into equations on the top. And that way, even while you're doing the reading section, that math idea is there ready for you for when you do get to the math later. It's written down. You don't have to hold it in your head. You don't have to worry about forgetting it. It's written on the page. And then anytime you catch yourself staring at a question, remember, you've written it down. That's your little mantra. Plug points into equations, dumb summaries, things like that can get you kind of like trying new things and experimenting and just kind of continuing with the question so that you're doing something. And most of the time, I think you'll find it works out. If you need more practice with this, it's really easy. Literally any of the videos on my channel is going to emphasize dumb summaries, plugging points into equations, those step one strategies that you really need for all sorts of questions on the test. There are times when those things are going to fail. Yes. But I think more often than not, they will succeed. And at least it gives you something to think about for every single question. So you will see in my videos explaining the test questions that's where my brain goes instantly. I'm instantly thinking about those strategies for every question. You will see in the free strategy series that I have on my channel, on my homepage, that most of those strategies are based on these step one strategies of just getting questions started. So anything on my channel is always going to emphasize these step one strategies because I think that that's a really, really important part of score improvement, is not worrying about the specific details of every single question, but instead having these kind of big moves, these big ideas, these big strategies that we can use no matter what the question looks like. I don't care if it's about geometry or quadratics or lines. If I've got points and equations, I'm plugging them in. That makes it so much easier to think about the test. It requires less mental energy. And so there's a lot of good that comes from having a good step one strategy. So for more practice, check out my channel, check out my website. I'm Mike Settele, founder of Settele Tutoring. And remember, when it comes to your scores, don't settle for less, Settele for more. Thanks for watching.